Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku mastered blood magic to protect the weak. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had a habit of shrinking. For Izuku Midoriya, it had been contracting for years. Each jeer, each pitying look, each hopeless diagnosis from a doctor with kind eyes and a cruel truth shaving another sliver off his reality. His world had once been as wide as the sky, filled with the boundless potential of heroes like All Might. Now, it was a cramped, airless box, the lid nailed shut by the very man who had inspired him to dream in the first place. It's not bad to dream, but you have to be realistic. The words echoed in the hollow space behind his ribs, a phantom pain that was somehow more real than the ache in his hero-worshipping heart. All Might's skeletal form, the steam rising from his body like a dying ember, was seared into Izuku's mind. The symbol of peace, the pillar of his entire existence, had told him no. Not just no, but a definitive, logical, soul-crushing no that left no room for the foolish optimism that had fueled him for 14 years. He trudged down the sterile sidewalk, the setting sun casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to mock his small frame. The city of Muzurifu, usually a vibrant symphony of quirks and bustling life, was muted. The roar of traffic was a distant hum, the chatter of pedestrians a meaningless buzz. His prized notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13, felt like a lead weight in his hand. The cover, once a proud declaration of his ambition, was now a testament to his naivety. Its pages, filled with meticulous drawings and frantic scribbles, were just the ramblings of a deluded child. All Might's signature, a bold, sprawling autograph that should have been his most treasured possession, felt like an epitaph on the tombstone of his dream. He should have gone straight home. He should have climbed the stairs to his apartment, greeted his mother with a watery, unconvincing smile, and retreated to the suffocating confines of his All Might-themed bedroom to let the reality of his future, or lack thereof, finally drown him. But his feet, as they so often did, carried him on a familiar path, one worn into his subconscious by years of habit. It was the path of the hero chaser, the route that always seemed to intersect with trouble, with the thrilling, terrifying spectacle of heroes in action. Today, however, there was no thrill. There was only a dull, throbbing emptiness. Then he heard it. An explosion. It wasn't the distant, percussive thump of a routine villain fight. This was a deep, guttural boom that rattled the very air, followed by the shriek of twisting metal and the panic symphony of car alarms. It was close. A plume of thick, acrid black smoke billowed into the orange-tinted sky just a few blocks away. The old Izuku would have been sprinting towards it, notebook flapping, mind already racing to analyze the quirks involved. The new Izuku, the one born on a rooftop scant minutes ago, barely flinched. What was the point? It was a show he wasn't allowed to be a part of, a game for which he didn't have the right equipment. It was for other people. For people with power. For people who were not him. Still, his feet kept moving, a morbid curiosity pulling him forward. He joined the growing crowd of onlookers being held back by a police barricade. The scene was chaotic. The narrow street, one he recognized from his shopping trips with his mother, was a disaster zone. Flames licked up the sides of buildings, consuming storefronts and signs. The source of the mayhem was a monstrous, churning entity of viscous green sludge, the same villain All Might had saved him from earlier. A cold dread, colder than his despair, trickled down his spine. The bottle. All Might must have dropped the bottle when he'd grabbed onto his leg. This was his fault. This destruction, this terror, it was his fault. He watched as the pro-heroes on the scene struggled. Death Arms was trying to land a punch, but his fist just sank into the amorphous body with a disgusting squelch. Kamui Woods was there, but the fire was too widespread. He couldn't risk using his wood-based quirk. Backdraft, the water hose hero, was working furiously to contain the inferno, but it was a losing battle against the villain's explosive rage. They were doing their best, but they were the wrong heroes for the job. They were all waiting. Waiting for someone with the right power, the right strength, to arrive. The crowd murmured around him. Why aren't the heroes doing anything? That villain is huge! He's got someone trapped in there! Izuku's eyes snapped back to the sludge monster. The man was right. Immersed within the swirling, putrid green, a figure was struggling, thrashing wildly. A shock of spiky, ash-blonde hair, a familiar school uniform. Explosions, small and muffled, were erupting from the villain's body, doing more to fuel the surrounding fires than to harm the creature itself. Kaken, the world, which had shrunk to the size of a coffin, suddenly fractured. In that instant, everything else vanished. The crowd, the ineffective heroes, the smoke, the noise, it all faded into a gray, featureless backdrop. The only thing in focus was Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend, his tormentor, his rival, drowning in a sea of filth. And his eyes. For a split second, the villain's body shifted, and Izuku saw Kaken's eyes. They were wide, red-rimmed, and filled with a terror Izuku had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was the primal, desperate fear of a person who was suffocating, who was staring directly into the face of his own death. And in those eyes, Izuku saw a plea. A desperate, silent scream for help. His notebook and backpack fell from his nerveless fingers, hitting the pavement with a soft thud. Before his brain could register the action, before the crushing weight of his uselessness could chain him down, his legs were moving. He scrambled under the police tape, ignoring the shouts of the officers and the gasps of the crowd. "You idiot! Get back here! It's suicide!" a hero yelled. He didn't hear them. All he could hear was a frantic inner monologue, a desperate scramble for a plan. What am I doing? What can I possibly do? I'm quirkless. I'm useless. His own mind screamed at him, but his body wouldn't stop. His eyes darted around, searching for anything, any weakness. He remembered his notes, the scribbles he'd made just hours before. Page 25, the sludge villain, vulnerable to pressure in the eyes and solid parts of the body. He had no way to apply pressure. He had nothing. No, not nothing. He wrenched his backpack off the ground as he ran. It was a stupid, flimsy school bag. But it was all he had. With a desperate yell that tore from his throat, he swung the bag, heavy with textbooks, and hurled it at the villain. It was a pathetic gesture, but by some miracle of fate, a sharp corner of a textbook inside struck the villain directly in its massive, bulbous eye. The monster roared in pain, its body constricting. For a single, precious second, its grip on Bakugo loosened. A small pocket of air opened up. "Kaken!" Izuku screamed, his voice raw. Bakugo gasped, dragging in a ragged, painful breath. He saw Izuku, and for a heart-stopping moment, his terrified expression morphed into one of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. "Deku, what the hell are you doing here?" "I don't know," Izuku stammered, clawing uselessly at the sludge encasing Bakugo's arm. "My legs, they just started moving." His fingers slipped, finding no purchase on the slick, disgusting body. "I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." The villain recovered, its massive form surging. "You again! The little gnat!" It boomed, a slimy tendril lashing out. Izuku was too close. There was nowhere to run. The world slowed to a crawl. He could see the semi-transparent green mass coming for him, could see the distorted streetlights reflected in its surface. This was it. This was how it ended. Not as a hero, not even as a bystander, but as a foolish, quirkless kid who got in the way. He was going to die because he couldn't stop his own stupid, heroic instincts. His mother's face flashed in his mind. "I'm sorry, Mom." He closed his eyes, bracing for the impact that would end his pathetic life. And then, something inside him answered his despair. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a quirk manifesting in a glorious burst of light. It was a bargain, struck in the deepest, most desperate corner of his soul. A primal, instinctual scream that said, "I don't care what it costs. I don't care if it kills me. Just give me the power to save him. For 1 second. Give me something." The answer was pain. It started as a spark behind his eyes, then erupted into a searing, white-hot agony that consumed his entire being. It felt as if his very blood had been set ablaze, boiling in his veins. A pressure built in his right arm, 1,000 times worse than the feeling of a limb falling asleep. It was an active, tearing sensation, as if millions of tiny needles were trying to burst out from the inside. A choke scream was ripped from his lungs, lost in the din of the chaos. His vision swam, tinted with a sickening crimson hue. He could feel it. Something was giving way. The skin on his forearm felt like it was ripping apart on a microscopic level. A fine, red mist, almost invisible in the firelight, vented from the pores of his arm. It hung in the air for a fraction of a second before a force he couldn't comprehend began to pull it together. The pain intensified, focusing into a single point just beyond his clenched fist. The atomized blood coalesced, spinning, compressing, hardening. It was a messy, chaotic process, like watching a crystal grow in fast forward. The metallic, coppery smell of blood, thick and overwhelming, filled his nostrils. He could feel his own life force, his very essence, being drained, pulled out of him and forged into something alien. In the space of a heartbeat, it was done. A 3-foot-long spear of solidified, crystalline crimson hovered before his hand. It was a horrific thing, jagged and imperfect, its surface swirling with shades of deep scarlet and near black. It didn't reflect the firelight. It seemed to drink it, to absorb the light into its dark, menacing form. The sludge villain, its tendril mere inches from Izuku's face, hesitated. Its giant eye widened, not in pain, but in a strange, primal confusion. It could not comprehend what it was seeing. Izuku had no time to think. He was running on an instinct that was not his own. His arm, feeling impossibly heavy and yet strangely disconnected from his body, shot forward. The crimson spear followed the motion, launching through the air with a faint, high-pitched shriek. It moved faster than anything Izuku had ever thrown, a streak of vengeance against the dying light. It struck the villain's other eye. There was no squelching sound. There was a sharp crack, like shattering glass, as the spear pierced the tough outer membrane. The villain let out a sound that was not a roar of anger, but a true, soul-shaking scream of agony. Its entire body convulsed violently, a massive, involuntary spasm. The sludge lost all cohesion, exploding outwards, releasing Bakugo, who collapsed to the ground, coughing and gagging. The connection to the spear snapped. The pain in Izuku's arm vanished, replaced by a terrifying, encroaching numbness. The world, which had been tinted red, began to fade to gray. A wave of dizziness so profound it felt like the ground was falling away from him washed over him. He felt cold. So incredibly cold. The roaring of the fire, the shouts of the heroes, the villain's screams, it all became a distant, muffled drone, as if he were underwater. His knees buckled. He saw a blurry, blonde shape on the ground, and a giant, muscular figure descending from the sky. All Might, he thought, a wave of relief so potent it felt like a final breath. He's safe. Then the world went black, and Izuku Midoriya knew no more. The first thing to return was sound. A rhythmic, insistent beeping. A calm, female voice, muffled and distant. The soft rumble of an engine. The second was sensation. The scratchiness of a cheap wool blanket. The gentle rocking motion of a vehicle. A dull, throbbing ache in his right arm, and a pervasive, bone-deep exhaustion that felt as if he hadn't slept in a year. The third was smell. Antiseptic. The faint, clean scent of ozone. And under it all, the phantom, metallic tang of blood. His blood. Izuku's eyelids fluttered open. The light was dim, filtered through the tinted window of what he slowly recognized as an ambulance. A paramedic with kind, worried eyes was checking a monitor beside his cot. She noticed he was awake and gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Hey there, kid! Take it easy. You gave us all quite a scare." He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his tongue thick. He managed a weak croak. "Kakin? The other boy is fine," the paramedic said, holding a small cup of water with a straw to his lips. "Shaken up, a few minor burns, but he's tough. He's in the other ambulance. You, on the other hand, you collapsed. We thought it was shock at first, but your blood pressure is dangerously low. We're giving you fluids now." He took a few sips of water, the cool liquid a balm on his raw throat. Memories came flooding back in disjointed, nightmarish flashes. The sludge. Bakugo's eyes. The pain. The red mist. The spear. He frantically looked down at his right arm. There was no wound. No gash, no hole, nothing. Just his pale, freckled skin. But when he looked closer, he could see them, dozens of impossibly tiny, pinprick-sized marks, like he'd been pricked by 1,000 microscopic needles. The skin around them was pale and bruised. What happened?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The paramedic's professional smile tightened. She exchanged a look with her partner in the front. "Honestly? We're not sure. 1 minute, the villain had the drop on you. The next, it was screaming, and you just fell. The heroes took care of the rest. You're very lucky All Might showed up when he did." All Might. The name was a jolt to his system. He remembered seeing him, a fleeting glimpse before he blacked out. The hero had been there. Had he seen it? Had he seen the impossible, horrifying thing Izuku had done? Panic began to set in. He had used a power. A quirk. But it wasn't a quirk. It was painful. It was bloody. It felt wrong. It was a villain's power. A power that hurt him, that took from him. What would they do to him? Would they think he was some kind of monster? The ambulance doors opened, and the cool evening air washed over him. They were parked in a cordoned-off area, away from the lingering emergency vehicles, and standing there, silhouetted against the flashing red and blue lights, was a gaunt, skeletal figure. Tashinori Yagi. All Might. His heart hammered against his ribs. The paramedics helped him sit up, then guided him out of the ambulance. Tashinori's face was grim, his deep-set eyes filled with an emotion Izuku couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was a heavy, profound concern mixed with something else. "Young man," Tashinori said, his voice a low rumble. "We need to talk." He glanced at the paramedics. "Thank you. I can take it from here." They nodded, albeit with some hesitation, and retreated, giving them a wide berth. Izuku stood before his idol, feeling small and exposed. He couldn't meet the man's eyes, staring instead at a crack in the pavement. I'm sorry," Izuku mumbled, tears welling up. "I got in the way. It's my fault the villain escaped. I was stupid." "Stupid?" Tashinori's voice was soft, but it cut through Izuku's self-flagellation. "No, young man. What you did was reckless. It was dangerous. It was an act of absolute insanity." He took a step closer, and Izuku flinched. "It was also the most heroic thing I have seen in a very long time." Izuku looked up, stunned. All Might's hollow cheeks were etched with turmoil. "When I saw you run out there, a quirkless boy with nothing but a school bag, I was frozen. I was ashamed. My own fear, my own limitations, had paralyzed me. But you moved. You acted when professionals, including myself, hesitated. You reminded me what it truly means to be a hero." This was it. This was the moment from his dreams. All Might was praising him. But the words felt hollow, because they were built on a lie. He wasn't a quirkless boy anymore. He was something else. "But I wasn't," he started, his voice cracking. "I know," All Might interrupted, his gaze intense. He glanced down at Izuku's right arm. "I saw it all. One moment you were defenseless, the next that thing. That spear. It came from you." I felt the pressure in the air change. I saw it form. Izuku's blood ran cold. He had seen it. He knew. "Young man," All Might said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I have seen thousands of quirks in my lifetime. I have fought villains with powers that can warp reality, but I have never seen anything like that. It didn't feel like a quirk. It felt older. Primal." He leaned in, his expression one of desperate seriousness. "Tell me. What was that?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and terrifying. Izuku had no answer. He didn't know what it was. He only knew the pain it had caused, the cold it left in its wake, and the undeniable fact that it had worked. It had saved Kaken. I don't know," he finally choked out, tears streaming freely down his face now. I wanted to save him. I didn't care what happened to me. I just begged for power. And something answered." All Might stared at him for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be looking not just at Izuku, but through him, into the very core of his being. He saw the trembling boy, the selfless spirit, and the terrifying, unknown power that now resided within him. Finally, he straightened up, a decision solidifying in his eyes. You possess a truly heroic spirit, Midoriya Izuku. The kind of spirit that runs on instinct to save others, even at great personal cost. And it seems you possess a power that takes that cost quite literally, he sighed, a plume of steam escaping his lips. A power that feeds on your own life force is a dangerous, dark path to walk. It is a hero's burden, but a path to self-destruction. He looked Izuku straight in the eye. You told me you wanted to be a hero. I told you it was impossible without a quirk. I was wrong. You proved me wrong. And because of that, I have an offer for you, a proposition. Izuku's breath hitched. Your power, this blood magic, it is a sacrificial one. It takes from you. But what if I could give you a power that adds to you? A power forged by generations of heroes, meant to be a symbol of hope, a light against the darkness. Steam began to billow from his body as he drew himself up to his full, heroic height, his muscles bulging. I can offer you my quirk! All Might boomed, his voice resonating with power and conviction. Izuku's mind reeled. The world tilted on its axis for the second time that day. All Might's quirk? A power he could inherit? It was impossible. It was a dream. My quirk is called One for All. All Might explained, the intensity in his voice unwavering. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next, a crystallization of power that stockpiles within each new user. I have been searching for a worthy successor, and today, I believe I have found him. In a selfless, reckless, insane boy who ran into danger not for glory or fame, but because his body moved on its own to save a life, he offered Izuku a choice. A choice between two paths. The bright, golden legacy of One for All, the power to be a smiling, victorious symbol of peace, or the dark, crimson path that had been violently carved into his own soul, the power to be a hero who literally bled for others. But as Izuku looked at All Might, at this incredible, unbelievable offer, he knew it wasn't a choice between them. He remembered the agony, the feeling of his life draining away. He knew that the power within him was a wild, untamed thing. How could he control it? How could he wield it without killing himself? Perhaps he didn't have to choose. One for All is a tremendous power. All Might continued, his voice softer now. It requires a strong vessel to wield, or it will tear the user apart. You will need to train, to build your body into a worthy container, a vessel. The word clicked in Izuku's mind. A strong container. His body was weak. One for All would break him. But the other power, the blood magic, what if it could reinforce him? What if the darkness could be used to contain the light? The possibilities, terrifying and exhilarating, bloomed in his mind. He looked at All Might, the hero who had crushed his dream and then offered him a new one. His eyes, for the first time that day, were not filled with tears of despair, but with a burning, determined resolve. He had been given a second chance, and a secret, dangerous weapon to go with it. He would become a hero. He would save people. And he would pay whatever price was required. I accept, Izuku said, his voice small but unshakable. I'll do it. I will be worthy of your power, All Might. A broad, proud smile, the first genuine one Izuku had seen from the man, spread across Toshinori's face. I knew you would, my boy. Later that night, long after the debriefing with the police, the tearful reunion with his mother, and the silent, resentful glare from a rescued Katsuki Bakugo, Izuku sat on the edge of his bed. His room, a shrine to the hero he was now destined to succeed, felt different. The posters and action figures were no longer just objects of worship. They were a legacy he had to uphold. His body ached with a profound weariness. His mother had fussed over him, taking his temperature and making him his favorite katsudan, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and relief. He told her a half-truth, that he'd been caught up in the villain attack and collapsed from shock. He couldn't tell her what really happened. He couldn't tell anyone. It was his secret. His burden. He slowly raised his right hand, turning it over under the gentle light of his desk lamp. The tiny pinpricks were still there, faint but visible against his pale skin. A map of his sacrifice. He gently traced the marks with the fingers of his other hand. They didn't hurt. But he could feel a phantom echo of the pain, a memory of fire in his veins. He focused on that memory. He closed his eyes and thought back to that moment of absolute desperation, the silent plea for power. He tried to summon that feeling again, not with the same life-or-death intensity, but with a gentle curiosity. He reached for the strange, alien energy coiled deep within him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, he felt it. A faint, warm thrumming in his arm, like a distant engine coming to life. A single pinprick on the tip of his index finger began to ache, a tiny echo of the earlier agony. He watched, mesmerized, as a perfect, single droplet of blood, impossibly crimson and rich, welled up on the surface of his skin. It didn't drip. It held its spherical shape, glistening like a ruby. It was a part of him, yet separate. He could feel it, a tiny extension of his own senses. He willed it to move, and it trembled, rolling slightly on his fingertip. He willed it to harden, and he felt a minuscule drain on his energy as the droplet's surface seemed to shimmer, becoming solid, like a tiny bead of glass. He had done it. Consciously. Without pain. This was his power. Not a quirk given by chance, but a bargain struck in desperation. It was a terrifying, intimate magic, fueled by his own life. All Might had offered him the light, but Izuku knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that to control that light and to truly protect the weak, he would have to master the darkness that now flowed through his very veins. The price would be steep, paid in his own blood, but looking at the crimson jewel on his fingertip, Izuku Midoriya knew it was a bargain he would make again and again. The sun rose on a world that was fundamentally different. Or perhaps, the world was the same, and it was only Izuku Midoriya who had been irrevocably altered. He woke with a gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs, the phantom sensation of boiling blood and shattering bone a fresh, visceral memory. He was tangled in his All Might-themed bedsheets, a cold sweat plastering his green hair to his forehead. For a frantic second, he thought it had all been a dream, the sludge, the spear, the skeletal hero, the impossible offer. Then he felt it. A deep, profound ache in his very marrow, a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. It was the physical price of yesterday's desperate bargain. He looked at his right arm, the skin pale under the morning light. The microscopic pinpricks were still there, a faint constellation of his sacrifice. It was real. A second, more subtle sensation was also present. It was a quiet hum of energy deep within his core, a pilot light where before there had been nothing. It was his own power, the crimson magic, now awake and aware. It felt like an empty vessel, waiting to be filled. The day passed in a surreal haze. His mother Inko fussed over him, her eyes still wide with the residual terror of seeing her only son on the news, listed as a victim in a villain attack. He ate her breakfast of rice and grilled fish mechanically, his mind 1,000 miles away, replaying All Might's words. "I can offer you my quirk." That afternoon, he received a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. Sunset." Aim. Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. Aim. All Might. He found the hero, in his skeletal Tashinori Yagi form, standing atop a mountain of garbage that cascaded down to the shoreline. The beach, once a beautiful local spot, had become an illegal dumping ground over the years, a forgotten testament to societal neglect. The setting sun painted the heaps of rusted appliances and tangled debris in hues of orange and purple, a tragically beautiful ruin. "A fine view, isn't it?" Tashinori said, his voice carried on the salty breeze. He gestured to the trash-strewn landscape. "The modern hero community has become obsessed with the flashy, the glorious. They fight the big villains, pose for the cameras. But community service? Civic duty? That's all been forgotten. They've all but abandoned this place." Izuku, still catching his breath from the climb, looked around at the staggering amount of junk. It was overwhelming. "You stood before a monster yesterday, young Midoriya," Tashinori continued, turning to face him, his deep-set eyes serious. "And something inside you answered the call. Before we proceed with my offer, we need to address yours. That power. I have done some research. There are no registered quirks that match its description. Nothing that involves spontaneous generation of solid matter from the user's own blood." Izuku's stomach twisted into a knot. This was it. The judgment. "My best guess," Tashinori said, placing a hand on his chin thoughtfully, is that it's a rare form of latent quirk. A survival type. A power that only manifests under the absolute threat of death, and at a great physical cost. It's not unheard of, though a case this extreme is new to me. We will register it as hemokinesis. It sounds professional, and is vague enough to avoid uncomfortable questions. Izuku felt a wave of relief so potent it nearly buckled his knees. All Might wasn't rejecting him. He was trying to understand, to contextualize it, to fit his terrifying, bloody secret into a neat little box labeled quirk. It was a lie, or at least a half-truth, but it was a lie Izuku would desperately cling to. It was his shield. The problem, Tashinori said, his tone turning grim, is that your body is not ready. Not for my power, and certainly not for a power that tries to consume you from the inside out. As you are now, you are an unworthy vessel. If you were to inherit one for all, your limbs would explode from your body. The image was so graphic, so horrifying, that Izuku paled. And if you rely on your own power, the hero added, his gaze flicking to Izuku's arm, you will simply bleed yourself dry. Either way leads to ruin. So we must change that, he grinned, a skeletal but determined expression. You are going to restore this entire coastline. You are going to move every last piece of this trash. You are going to turn this symbol of neglect back into a symbol of beauty. This will be your training, young Midoriya. You will spend the next 10 months forging your body into a vessel worthy of a hero. He produced a thick, stapled sheaf of papers from his jacket. This is my American Dream Plan. It's a comprehensive training regimen, diet plan, and sleep schedule. Follow it to the letter, and you will be ready by the time of the UA entrance exams. Izuku took the packet, his hands trembling. The weight of the paper felt like the weight of his entire future. It was an impossible task. The sheer volume of garbage was staggering, but looking at All Might's unwavering belief, and feeling the quiet thrum of potential inside him, Izuku found his resolve. I'll do it, he said, his voice clear and steady. I'll do more than you expect, All Might. I will not fail you. The first 3 months were hell. A pure, unadulterated, physical hell. Every morning before school, every evening after, and all through the weekends, Izuku was at the beach. His life became a grueling cycle of hauling, pushing, and pulling. He dragged rusted refrigerators whose doors groaned like dying men. He coiled miles of rotting fishing nets that tore his hands raw. He filled wheelbarrows with debris until his back screamed in protest. He followed the American Dream Plan with a zealot's devotion. His diet changed from his mother's comforting home cooking to a strict regimen of lean protein, complex carbohydrates, and more vegetables than he'd ever seen. He fell into bed each night, not just tired, but obliterated, every muscle fiber a searing ember of pain. During this initial period, he had no energy left for his other power. The crimson magic lay dormant, a quiet hum beneath the roaring fire of his physical exertion. He was too focused on the goal, on the promise of one for all. But as the months wore on, a new kind of fear began to creep in. His body was changing, yes. The soft, undefined lines of his form were hardening into lean, wiry muscle. He could now drag a washing machine without his lungs feeling like they were going to collapse. Yet he knew, with a deep, intuitive certainty, that it wouldn't be enough. He could feel the sheer, overwhelming power radiating from All Might whenever the hero transformed to demonstrate a technique. It was an ocean of energy, and Izuku was trying to contain it in a teacup. His body, no matter how strong he made it, would still break. That realization became his new motivation. He couldn't just rely on the path All Might had laid out for him. He had to forge his own. His secret training began in the dead of night. After his mother was asleep, after he had finished his homework, when the entire apartment complex was silent, he would sit on the floor of his room. The first few nights were frustrating. He tried to replicate the conditions of the sludge villain attack, focusing on desperation and fear, but it was forced and artificial. The power wouldn't answer. He changed his approach. This wasn't about desperation anymore. It was about control. He took a small sewing needle from his mother's kit, sterilized it with a lighter, and with a wince, pricked the tip of his finger. A single, perfect droplet of blood welled up. There. The connection. He closed his eyes, ignoring the tiny sting, and focused on the warm drop of life. He didn't try to shape it or harden it. He just felt it. He extended his senses into it, using it as an anchor. The world seemed to shift, the background noise of the city fading away. He could feel the rhythmic thump of his own heart, the rush of blood through his veins. It was a strange, internal meditation. Night after night he practiced this. The pricks became less hesitant. He learned to draw a small amount of blood with a quick, practiced motion, a tiny price for admission to his inner world. He started a new notebook, one he kept hidden under a loose floorboard in his closet. Sanguine analysis for the future. It felt darker, more personal than his hero journals. Entry 1. Control requires a physical medium. Cannot yet manifest blood from nothing. Must be drawn. The amount of pain seems irrelevant. Intent is key. Entry 2. Learn to draw blood from the pores of my hand without a needle, using sheer focus and will. It is more draining and less controlled. Feels hot. A small cut is more efficient. He bought a small, sterile lancet pen online, the kind diabetics used. It was clean, quick, and precise. A tiny, clinical click, a pinprick of pain, and he had his medium. It made him feel less like he was mutilating himself and more like a scientist conducting an experiment. The lie was comforting. One night, as he sat meditating with a drop of his blood on his knuckle, he felt something new. A faint, fluttering sensation on the edge of his awareness. He opened his eyes, but his room was empty. He focused again, pushing his senses into the blood droplet. The fluttering was still there. It felt alive. A tiny, rapid heartbeat. He crept to his window and looked out. On the railing of the balcony across the alleyway, a small sparrow was preening its feathers. He could feel its life force, a tiny, fragile spark in the vast emptiness of the night. He stumbled back, his mind reeling. I can feel things? Living things? Entry 7. A new ability has manifested. A kind of life sense. It seems to radiate from my externalized blood. The range is short, maybe 20 feet. I can feel the presence of living creatures, their heartbeats. It is stronger for mammals, weaker for insects. Does not work on plants. Requires extreme focus. I will call it a pulse sense. His experimentation grew bolder. He began shaping the blood. He'd draw a small line of it on the back of his hand and will it to harden. The first few times, it just became a brittle, flaky scab. But with practice, he learned to infuse it with his will, to compress the cells on a level he didn't understand. The result was a thin, crimson layer that shone with a glassy, obsidian light. He tapped it, and it was hard as plastic. A little more focus, a greater drain on his stamina, and it was as strong as ceramic. He had created armor. Next came weapons. He'd let a pool of his blood form in his palm and slowly, painstakingly, draw it out into the shape of a small dagger. It was a wobbly, imperfect thing at first, and it would dissolve back into a liquid pool after a few seconds. But he kept at it, his concentration growing, his control becoming more refined. The daggers became sharper, held their form longer. He practiced forming thin, prehensile whips, learning to make them an extension of his own arm. The cost of this secret training was immense. All Might's regimen was already pushing him to his physical limit. The addition of his blood magic was pushing him past it. He was in a constant state of managed anemia. He was always tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. He had persistent headaches. His skin grew paler, and dark circles became permanent fixtures under his eyes. His mother noticed. Izuku, are you all right? You look so pale. Are you pushing yourself too hard? She'd ask, her brow furrowed with worry. I'm fine, Mom. Just tired from the training. He'd reply with a bright, fake smile that felt like it was cracking his face. The guilt was a physical weight in his stomach. All Might noticed, too. You're looking a bit ragged, my boy, he said one evening, watching Izuku struggle to drag a rusted-out motorcycle. Remember, rest is just as important a part of the plan as the work itself. Yes, All Might. I understand. Izuku panted, refusing to stop, refusing to show weakness. The hero saw the fatigue, the pale skin, the small, unexplained scabs that sometimes appeared on his hands and arms. But he saw them through the lens of his own experience. He chalked it up to the harsh training, to a boy with unparalleled determination pushing himself beyond all reasonable limits for his dream. He saw grit, not a grim secret. He saw the makings of a great hero, not a boy slowly learning to sacrifice pieces of himself in the dark. The final month arrived. The beach was transformed. The mountains of garbage were gone, replaced by a vast expanse of clean, golden sand. Izuku stood atop the last remaining pile, a single, dented refrigerator, and roared at the rising sun, his voice raw with triumph. He was no longer the scrawny, trembling boy from 10 months ago. His body was a tightly coiled spring of lean muscle, scarred and calloused from his labor. All Might arrived in his muscle form, his laughter booming across the restored beach. "Oh my goodness!" he bellowed, taking in the sight. He pulled out his phone and showed Izuku a photo from 10 months prior, a picture of a crying, overwhelmed boy standing before a mountain of trash. Then he took a new one of Izuku, now strong and triumphant, on the fridge. The contrast was staggering. "Excellent work, young Midoriya!" All Might proclaimed, his smile wide and proud. "You have done it! You have forged yourself into a worthy vessel!" He plucked a single strand of his golden hair. "Someone once told me, there's a difference between being lucky and being deserving. It's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. You, my boy, have earned this power 100 times over." He held out the strand of hair to Izuku. "Eat this." Izuku's brain short-circuited. "Huh!" After a moment of comical confusion and a lengthy explanation about ingesting the user's DNA, Izuku took the hair. It felt anticlimactic, but as he swallowed it, he felt a profound shift. It wasn't a sudden explosion of power. It was a slow, warm tide, a golden energy that seeped into him, spreading through his body like sunlight through water. It was the gold, and as it settled within him, his own power, the crimson, stirred in response. It was like dropping a cold stone into a warm lake. The two energies didn't mix. They coexisted, swirling around each other, two immense and opposing forces now housed in the same fragile container. He could feel it, the boundless, hopeful energy of one for all, and the dark, sacrificial potential of his own blood. He was now a vessel for both the crimson and the gold. The day of the UA entrance exam arrived. Izuku stood before the colossal gates of his dream school, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He was surrounded by a sea of confident-looking teenagers, all chattering excitedly about their powerful quirks. He saw a girl with pink skin, a boy with engines in his legs, and Kaken. Bakugo shot him a venomous glare. "Get out of my way, Deku, before I set you on fire!" He shouldered past Izuku, the simmering rage and confusion from the sludge villain incident still palpable around him. Izuku felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. He hadn't had a chance to test one for all. All Might had warned him that even with his new body, using it at 100% would be catastrophic. He had no control, no finesse. In a way, he was still the quirkless kid, standing on the outside looking in. The practical exam was a simulated city environment. The goal was to score points by destroying robotic villains. As the massive gates opened and everyone surged forward, Izuku was left in the dust, frozen with indecision. "Okay, calm down. Analyze. What can I do?" He couldn't use one for all without turning his limbs into pulp. A single punch and he'd be out of the fight. That was his last resort. What about his hemokinesis? He could feel the familiar thrum of his power, ready and waiting. He could form daggers, maybe a whip. But the robots were made of metal. A blood dagger might score a lucky hit on a sensor, but it would take too much time, too much blood, too much focus to disable even one. It was a power for precision and deadly encounters, not a wide-scale brawl against machines. For agonizing minutes he ran through the city, a useless spectator. The other examinees were racking up points, their quirks a dazzling display of power. He heard explosions from Bakugo, saw lasers, tape, and acid. He had 0 points. The despair was a cold, familiar hand gripping his heart. Was this it? After all that training, was he going to fail? Then the ground trembled. A deep, groaning roar echoed through the artificial canyons as a building collapsed. From the dust and debris rose a monster of metal and rivets, A robot so immense it dwarfed the surrounding skyscrapers. The zero-pointer. The gimmick All Might had warned them about, an obstacle to be avoided, not fought. Panic erupted. Students scrambled, running away from the colossal threat. Izuku was about to do the same when he heard a cry. "Ow! My leg!" He turned and saw her. The kind, brown-haired girl who had stopped him from tripping at the entrance gate. She was trapped under a slab of concrete, her leg pinned, directly in the path of the advancing behemoth. The world went silent. The panic screams, the grinding of the robot's gears, the pounding of his own heart, it all faded away. It was the sludge villain all over again. A person in danger, a plea for help in their eyes. There was no choice. There was never a choice. He ran. He ran towards the danger, towards the impossible foe. He could feel the golden power of One for All surging within him, a wild, untamed star begging for release. He knew what he had to do. He had to jump, he had to punch, he had to save her. And he had to accept that the price would be a shattered body. He channeled the power into his legs and leaped. The ground cracked beneath his feet as he rocketed into the air, a green blur soaring towards the robot's giant head. He pulled his right arm back, and the golden energy coalesced, crackling around his fist like a miniature sun. The power was terrifying, exhilarating. It felt like it was going to tear him apart from the inside. Destroy it, he thought. One punch. Even if it's the only thing I do. But as he flew through the air, his 10 months of secret training, the pain, the discipline, the endless nights of blood and focus, asserted themselves. An instinct, deeper and more primal than the desire to be a hero, screamed from the core of his being. It was the instinct to survive. He couldn't stop the golden power, but he could try to contain it. In the microsecond before impact, he didn't even think. He acted. He flooded his right arm with his own power. There was no time for a precise cut. He forced the blood directly through his pores, an explosive venting of his life force. A crimson mist erupted around his arm, and in an instant, it flash-hardened, compressing into a semi-translucent, crystalline gauntlet that covered his fist and forearm. It was his strongest armor, forged from pure instinct, born from his will to weather the coming storm. The crimson embraced the gold. His fist connected with the zero-pointer's head. The sound was apocalyptic. It was a sonic boom and a god's thunderclap rolled into one. The golden energy of One for All, 100 times more powerful than he could have imagined, discharged in a single, cataclysmic blast. The robot's head imploded, a shower of shredded metal and sparks. The crimson armor on his arm held for a fraction of a second against the impossible force, a desperate shield against the supernova. Then, it shattered with a sound like 1,000 panes of glass breaking at once. Then came the pain. It was a clean, sharp, agonizing snap. He felt his bones break. The radius and the ulna in his forearm, the humerus in his upper arm, they all fractured under the recoil. But the damage, while immense, was contained. His skin didn't tear. His muscles didn't explode. The blood armor, in its final, sacrificial act, had absorbed the explosive, outward force, focusing the kinetic recoil into a series of traumatic but manageable fractures. It had saved his arm from being turned into a cloud of red mist. He was falling, his right arm a useless, mangled wreck, his legs broken from the initial jump. The ground rushed up to meet him. This was it. He'd saved the girl, but he'd doomed himself. He closed his eyes. A sharp slap to his cheek brought him back from the edge of unconsciousness. He was floating. The kind girl, now free, had made him weightless. She gently set him down on the pavement just as the buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. He lay there, broken and gasping, as a tiny, elderly woman in a hero costume approached him. "Recovery girl. My. You really did a number on yourself, Sonny," she said, her voice surprisingly stern. She leaned in and gave his forehead a soft, puckering kiss. A wave of warmth spread through him as her healing quirk activated, accelerating his body's natural processes. He felt his bones begin to knit, a strange, itchy, and deeply exhausting sensation. Later, in the pristine white of the nurse's office, Recovery Girl was looking at his X-rays with a deep frown. Izuku, now patched up but feeling as if he'd been run over by a truck, sat nervously on the edge of a cot. This is quite the injury, she said, tapping the screen showing the fractures in his arm. I've seen this kind of recoil damage before. My fair share of it from a certain oaf, in fact. She glanced at him over her glasses, her eyes sharp and intelligent. But his were always messier. More explosive. Tearing of the muscle tissue, severe hemorrhaging. Catastrophic destruction. She turned back to the X-ray. Yours, this is different. The breaks are severe, yes. Multiple compound fractures. But they're clean. Strangely contained. All the damage is internal, to the bone structure. It's as if your arm was encased in some kind of incredibly strong, form-fitting cast that shattered upon impact. Izuku's heart stopped. She had seen it. Or rather, she saw the evidence of it. He had created a perfect cast of blood, and she was reading its ghost on his X-rays. He stammered, I don't know, it just happened. Recovery girl gave him a long, searching look, her gaze filled with a professional curiosity that bordered on deep suspicion. She had been healing heroes for decades. She knew the human body, knew what quirks did to it. And what she saw in Izuku Midoriya's injuries did not compute. It was a medical anomaly, a puzzle that didn't fit the pieces she had been given. Indeed, she said slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. Well, you get some rest. A power that does this to you is not a power at all. It's a liability. As she turned away, Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His secret was safe, for now. But for the first time, he understood that his path would be scrutinized not just by heroes and villains, but by those who understood the price his body would have to pay. He had passed the exam, he had proven his two powers could work together, but he had also placed himself under the microscope of a woman who might be the only person in the world smart enough to unravel his crimson secret. The acceptance letter from Yui arrived in a sleek, off-white envelope that felt heavier than 100 textbooks. It was a tangible piece of his dream, a dream he'd nearly bled to death for. The hologram of All Might that flickered to life, booming with congratulations, was a surreal moment. He had done it. He, Izuku Midoriya, the once quirkless, was officially a student at the most prestigious hero academy in Japan. His mother's tears of joy were both a balm and a burden. He was her pride, her hero, but he carried a secret that would surely break her heart. He was walking a tightrope between two immense powers, one a gift, the other a curse, and the fall would be fatal. The first day at Yui was a dizzying whirlwind of nerves and awe. The school was a monument to heroism, its halls echoing with the unseen footsteps of legends. He found his classroom, 1A, its door comically oversized. Taking a deep breath, he slid it open and was immediately plunged into the very specific brand of chaos that was his new life. The stern, blue-haired boy with glasses from the exam, Ida Tenya, was chastising Kaken for having his feet on the desk. The friendly, brown-haired girl who had saved him, Uraraka Achiko, was right there, her bubbly presence a small island of calm in the storm. Finding them here felt like a good omen. Then their homeroom teacher arrived, not in a grand entrance, but by slithering into the room inside a yellow sleeping bag, looking like a world-weary caterpillar. Shota Aizawa, the erasure hero, Eraserhead. Izuku's mind, the ever-present database of hero knowledge, supplied the information instantly. An underground hero known for his logic, impatience, and brutally effective fighting style. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. Aizawa droned, his voice devoid of any emotion. Life is not a game. You're all here to become heroes. We don't have time for pointless pleasantries and orientation ceremonies. He unzipped his sleeping bag and stepped out, his eyes bloodshot and heavy with a chronic lack of sleep. Put these on and meet me on the field. He tossed a set of blue UA gym uniforms onto his desk. The quirk apprehension test. Aizawa's reputation for expelling students he deemed without potential was infamous. The threat of expulsion on the very first day hung over them like a guillotine. One by one, they went through the tests, a 50-meter dash, a grip strength test, a standing long jump. Izuku watched as his classmates unleashed their incredible quirks. Ida's engines propelled him like a rocket. Uraraka made herself weightless. A boy with a tail used it for extra propulsion, and Bakugo used his explosions to launch himself with terrifying force and precision, his score a testament to his raw power. Izuku's scores in the first few tests were painfully average, a product of his physical training but lacking the explosive edge a quirk provided. He could feel the familiar weight of his classmates' pitying glances, the sharp, impatient glare from Aizawa. The old, quirkless Deku was resurfacing, and the fear of being left behind was a cold knot in his stomach. Then came the final test, the ball throw. This was it. The same test he'd failed so spectacularly in middle school. The moment of truth. Aizawa's bored, tired eyes fixed on him. Midoriya. You're up. Your performance has been lackluster. You broke your body all to hell in the entrance exam. You can't keep relying on others to save you from your own recklessness. His gaze was sharp, analytical. A hero who becomes a one-trick pony is a liability on the battlefield. Show me you have something else. Show me you have control. The ultimatum was clear. A full power, arm-shattering throw would prove nothing but his inability to manage his power. It would earn him a one-way ticket out of UA. He walked to the circle, the soft ball feeling strangely light in his hand. He could feel the golden energy of one for all thrumming under his skin, a caged lion roaring to be released. If he let it flood his entire arm, it would shatter again. He had to focus it. Confine it. But how? He was still a teacup trying to hold an ocean. No, a voice whispered in the back of his mind. A darker, colder voice that smelled of copper. You're not a teacup. You're a vessel. And a vessel can be reinforced. He closed his eyes for a second, shutting out the skeptical faces of his classmates. He focused inward on the quiet, crimson hum of his other power. The training from the past 10 months, the endless nights of silent, bloody practice, took over. He wasn't forming an external suit of armor this time. He needed something internal, something subtle. He took a slow, deep breath and drove his focus into the tip of his right index finger. He made a tiny, almost invisible cut on the inside of his wrist with his thumbnail, a familiar, practiced motion. A minuscule amount of blood entered his own circulatory system under his conscious control. He guided it, a warm, tingling sensation, down the arteries of his arm. He pictured the bones in his finger, the distal, middle, and proximal phalanges. He envisioned his blood, his life force, seeping into the porous, honeycomb structure of the bones themselves. He willed it to harden. A strange, dull ache bloomed in his finger, a feeling of intense pressure from within. It felt like his bones were turning to stone. He was creating an internal scaffolding, a reinforced pillar inside the very digit he would use to release the power. He was turning one small part of his body into a suitable cannon barrel. He opened his eyes. The feeling was bizarre, his index finger feeling both numb and incredibly solid, disconnected from the rest of his hand. He took his throwing stance, pulling his arm back. He could feel the golden tide of one for all rising. He didn't fight it. He guided it, channeling the entire raging ocean of power down his arm, forcing it into that one, single, reinforced point. Smash! He roared, whipping his arm forward. The power erupted from the tip of his index finger. The soft ball shot out with a deafening crack of displaced air, a miniature sonic boom that kicked up a plume of dust. It became a white speck in the sky, soaring farther than anyone else's throw, leaving a vapor trail in its wake. The recoil was immense. A shockwave of force traveled back up his arm. But instead of shattering his entire limb, it met the reinforced column of his finger. The bones held, but the rest of his body was not prepared. The finger itself swelled instantly, turning a grotesque, angry shade of purple and black. It was broken, dislocated, and utterly ruined, but it was only his finger. The rest of his arm was intact. The rest of his body was fine. He hadn't been incapacitated. He stood there, panting, cradling his mangled finger, a triumphant, pain-laced grin on his face. He had done it. He had controlled it. Aizawa watched the device in his hand, his eyes widening slightly as the number settled. 705.3 meters. He looked from the incredible score back to Izuku, who was clutching his broken finger but still standing, still ready to fight. A slow, predatory smile spread across Aizawa's face. Not bad, he grunted. You're not entirely hopeless, it seems. You have potential, kid. Irrational, but not without potential. The class erupted in shocked murmurs. Izuku felt a wave of relief so powerful he almost collapsed. He had passed. He belonged here. From the crowd, one pair of eyes burned into him with an intensity that had nothing to do with surprise or admiration. Katsuki Bakugo stared, his face a mask of incandescent rage and utter confusion. He had seen the throw. He had felt the impossible power. But he had also seen something else. He had seen Deku's stance, the flicker of concentration in his eyes just before the throw. And he'd smelled it, faintly on the wind, carried with the dust kicked up by the blast, the unmistakable, coppery scent of fresh blood. It was the same smell from the sludge villain incident. A smell he now associated with Deku's impossible, infuriating power. This wasn't just a strength quirk. This was something else, something Deku was hiding. Something fundamentally wrong. The first heroics class was combat training, taught by a booming, theatrical All Might. They were pitted against each other in a 2-on-2, heroes versus villains exercise. Izuku was paired with Uraraka, the very personification of cheerful determination. Their opponents, in a cruel twist of fate, were Ida and Bakugo. The scenario was simple. The villains were guarding a nuclear weapon in a building. The heroes had to either capture the villains or secure the weapon. Bakugo's intentions were far from simple. This wasn't a training exercise for him. This was an interrogation. This was a beatdown. This was his chance to rip the truth out of the useless Deku who had somehow surpassed him. Just tell me one thing, Deku! Bakugo snarled as he stalked Izuku through the concrete corridors of the training building. His voice was a low, dangerous growl. Have you been hiding this quirk from me all this time? Have you been laughing at me behind my back for years, you damn nerd? No, Kaken, you've got it all wrong! Izuku yelled back, dodging a blistering explosion that blackened the wall where his head had been. This power, it's something I just got. It's not what you think. He was telling a half-truth, but a half-truth was still a lie. The golden power was new, a borrowed gift. The crimson power, however, was his, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that he would need it to survive this. Bakugo was a whirlwind of controlled violence. He was smart, tactical, and brutally efficient. Izuku, armed with his hero analysis and years of studying Bakugo's every move, could predict his attacks, but his body, unaccustomed to real combat, could barely keep up. He was on the defensive, dodging, weaving, his mind racing. He couldn't use one for all. A single punch would break his arm and end the fight, likely resulting in a loss for his team. He had to rely on his wits, and on the secret ace up his sleeve. He gave Uraraka the plan over their comms. Find the weapon. I'll keep Kaken busy. But Deku, he'll kill you! She protested, her voice tight with worry. Just trust me, Uraraka-san! He needed to create an opening. Bakugo was relentless, his explosions forcing Izuku further and further back. He cornered Izuku in a dead-end hallway. The air crackled with heat and the smell of nitroglycerin. Nowhere left to run, you cheating bastard! Bakugo grinned, pulling back the pin on his grenade-like gauntlet. I've been storing up my sweat? This is gonna be big. Izuku knew he couldn't dodge this. The blast would fill the entire hallway. He had seconds. He slammed his back against the wall, digging his fingernails into his palms, breaking the skin. The familiar warmth of his power answered his call. Blood seeped from the cuts, but instead of letting it pool, he forced it out, drawing it into long, thin tendrils. 2 crimson whips, no thicker than wire, shot out from his fists. They were faster than Bakugo expected, moving with a serpent-like grace. They weren't meant to harm. They were a distraction. One whip lashed around Bakugo's ankle, the other coiled around the gauntlet on his arm. They weren't strong enough to stop him, but the sudden, cold, wet sensation was a shock to his system. For a fraction of a second, his focus was broken. What is this crap? He roared, blasting the whips away with a small, focused explosion. They dissolved into a fine red mist. But that fraction of a second was all Izuku needed. He used Bakugo's momentary distraction to sprint, not away, but towards him, diving into a low slide. He slid past Bakugo's legs, the heat of the gauntlet washings over his back, and kept running. Bakugo, furious at being outmaneuvered, unleashed the blast anyway. A massive, deafening explosion ripped through the hallway, blowing out the windows and shaking the entire building. But Izuku was already clear. He feigned a left, and then ducked right, into an adjacent room, putting a wall between them. He pressed his ear to the concrete, listening to Bakugo's enraged stomping. Over the comms, he heard Uraraka. "Deku! I've found it! But Itakun is guarding it. He's cleared out the whole room. I can't get close." This was it. The final play. He took a deep breath. "Uraraka-san, get to the pillar directly below the weapon. When I give the signal, use your quirk on it. Then get ready to grab the weapon." "The pillar? But what are you going to do?" Izuku didn't answer. He heard Bakugo's footsteps approaching. He took his stance, channeling one for all not into his fist, but up through his entire body, ready to release it in one massive, upward strike. The golden power felt like it was going to tear every muscle in his body. To contain it, to survive it, he needed his own power. He bit down hard on his lower lip, the sharp tang of blood filling his mouth. He drew the power from that small wound, circulating it through his torso and his non-punching arm. He wasn't creating an external shell this time, or even reinforcing his bones. He was doing something new. He was weaving the blood directly into his muscle fibers and capillaries, a network of internal, hardened veins to act as shock absorbers, to hold his very torso together against the force that was about to be unleashed. It was an agonizing process, a feeling of being petrified from the inside out. The door exploded inward as Bakugo blasted it off its hinges. "I've got you, DKU! It's now or never!" Izuku yelled, both to himself and into the comms. He pivoted, facing the ceiling, not his opponent. He threw an uppercut aimed at the floor of the room directly above him. "Detroit!" "Smash!" He released one for all. The force was astronomical. His left arm, the one he hadn't reinforced, shattered in multiple places. The bones in his legs cracked from the strain of anchoring him to the floor. But his torso, held together by his grim, crimson magic, remained intact. The punch didn't just break the floor above him, it obliterated it. The entire section of the building disintegrated, sending a massive shockwave upwards that ripped through every floor, culminating in a colossal explosion of air and debris on the level where Ida and Uraraka were. The meticulously cleared-out room was instantly filled with a hurricane of rubble. Ida, caught completely off guard, was thrown off balance. In that single moment of chaos, Uraraka, floating weightlessly on the updraft, slapped the pillar as planned, making it zero gravity, then launched herself off it like a human cannonball, wrapping her arms around the papier-mâché weapon. "The hero team wins!" All Might's voice boomed over the intercom. Just as Izuku collapsed, his body broken and his consciousness fading, he woke up in Recovery Girl's office again. The crisp white sheets, the smell of antiseptic, the gentle beeping of a monitor, it was becoming a distressingly familiar environment. "You have got to be kidding me," was the first thing he heard. It was Aizawa's deadpan voice. He was standing by the window, arms crossed, looking thoroughly unimpressed. Twice in as many days you've ended up here, having turned your body into a sack of broken glass. This is not sustainable, Midoriya." Izuku tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea and exhaustion forced him back down. Recovery Girl had healed him, but the stamina cost was immense. He felt like he'd been awake for a week straight. "Your application of your power is clever, I'll give you that," Aizawa continued, his gaze sharp and piercing. "That ball throw, focusing the recoil into a single point, was strategically sound. But this, destroying your body and the building just to create a distraction? It's reckless. It's irrational. I won," Izuku whispered, his throat dry. "You won the battle. But in a real fight you would be dead," Aizawa countered flatly. "A hero who can't fight after their first move is a corpse, not a protector. And there's something else." He walked closer to the bed, his dark eyes boring into Izuku. "That stunt with the whips? The way you withstood that final punch? Your quirk is registered as superpower. A simple strength enhancement, but that's not all it is it?" "I saw the feed. I saw the red mist dissolve off Bakugo's arm. I saw the look on your face before that final punch, a rictus of pain that had nothing to do with the power you were about to unleash," Aizawa leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, serious murmur. I am your teacher, Midoriya. Secrets get you killed in our line of work. I am not going to pry it out of you. But I am putting you on a watch list, not because I think you're a villain, but because I think your power, whatever its true nature may be, is just as dangerous to you as it is to your enemies. Figure out how to use it without destroying yourself, or I will remove you from my class. I will not send a suicide bomber out into the field. The threat was cold, pragmatic, and utterly terrifying. Aizawa didn't care about the source of his power, only its results. And the results so far were a trail of self-destruction. Later that evening, after being discharged, Izuku saw Uraraka and Ida waiting for him outside the nurse's office. Their faces were etched with concern. Midoriya-kun, are you okay? Ida asked, his usual rigid posture softened with genuine worry. That was an incredibly reckless but astoundingly effective strategy. Don't scare us like that again, Deku-kun, Uraraka added, her eyes misty. When I saw you collapse like that, I was so scared. Their concern was a warm counterpoint to Aizawa's cold logic. But it was still rooted in what they didn't know. They saw a boy with a powerful but self-destructive quirk. They didn't see the anemic exhaustion, the constant, low-level pain from his secret training, the metallic taste that was always at the back of his throat. They didn't see the price he was paying in silence. As he walked home, the weight of his lies felt heavier than ever. He was fooling everyone. He was fooling All Might, who saw a worthy successor. He was fooling his teachers, who saw a reckless prodigy. He was fooling his friends, who saw a selfless hero. He was justifying it all as necessary. A necessary deception to control one for all, to keep himself from being a burden, to become the hero he needed to be. But as he walked under the darkening sky, a chilling thought slithered into his mind. Who was he really fooling? He was becoming more and more adept at using his blood, at sacrificing pieces of himself for victory. He was getting used to the pain. He was getting good at hiding the cost. And he couldn't shake the feeling that the line between using his dark power as a tool and being consumed by it was getting thinner every single day. The veins of power running through him carried both gold and crimson, but he was starting to wonder which one was truly in control. The klaxon shriek was a jagged, unnatural sound that tore through the manufactured piece of the unforeseen simulation joint. It was a sound of violation. One moment, Izuku was buzzing with the nervous excitement of his first off-campus training exercise. The next, a roiling, purple-black mist vomited a horde of villains into the heart of their sanctuary. The air, once filled with the scent of chlorinated water and damp earth, was now thick with a palpable malevolence. Time seemed to stretch and distort. He saw the cold, calculating eyes of his teacher, Aizawa, narrow in an instant. He saw the flicker of confusion on 13's helmeted face. And he saw the man at the center of it all, a lanky figure, draped in black, his face and body obscured by a gruesome collection of disembodied hands. A scratch-addled voice that grated on the ears. Tamura Shigaraki. Where is he? The handman rasped, his voice a dry, cracking whisper that carried with unnatural clarity. I went through all the trouble of bringing so many friends to say hello, and All Might, the symbol of peace, isn't even here. What followed was a maelstrom of chaos. Aizawa, a whirlwind of black cloth and captured limbs, leaped into the fray, his erasure quirk flickering like a strobe light as he nullified villain after villain. The Warp Gate villain, Kurogyri, scattered the students across the facility, a masterful stroke of tactical division. Izuku found himself plunging into the shipwreck zone, the cold water a shocking embrace, alongside Tsuyu Ajiri and Minoru Mineta. His mind, sharpened by months of grueling analysis and a newfound, life-or-death pragmatism, kicked into high gear. He assessed their situation, their quirks, their opponents. He formulated a plan, a desperate gambit that combined Tsuyu's frog-like abilities, Mineta's sticky spheres, and the raw, untamed power of One for All. He created a whirlpool, a miniature maelstrom that drew the aquatic villains into a single, helpless clump. It was clever. It was effective. It was heroic, but it wasn't enough. Not for what was to come. They made their way back to the central plaza, drawn by the sounds of a battle that was reaching its horrifying crescendo. They arrived just in time to see Aizawa, their fierce, seemingly invincible teacher, slammed face first into the concrete by a creature that defied biology. It was a mountain of muscle, its skin a dark, scarred purple, its brain exposed and pulsating, its eyes blank and dead. "Anomu," Shigaraki cackled, a dry, joyless sound. "You're so cool, Eraserhead. But you're no match for him. He's the anti-symbol of peace." The Nomu, under Shigaraki's command, twisted Aizawa's arm with a sickening, wet crunch. It broke his other arm. It smashed his head into the ground again and again, the sickening thuds echoing in the cavernous dome. Izuku felt a scream building in his throat, a sound of pure, helpless rage. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't a game. This was a slaughter. He was about to charge in, to do something, anything, when Shigaraki's attention shifted. The villain moved with a speed that was unnervingly fast, his hand reaching for Tsuyu. "You're one of the kids he saved, aren't you?" Shigaraki mused, his voice laced with a childish, petulant cruelty. "Let's see what happens when your face turns to dust." Time stopped. Izuku saw it all with a terrible, slow-motion clarity. He saw the 5 fingers of Shigaraki's hand, spread wide, about to make contact with Tsuyu's terrified face. He saw Mineta weeping in fear. He saw Aizawa, bloody and broken, his erasure quirk finally fading as his head was lifted from the ground. He knew, with an absolute and chilling certainty, that he didn't have time. There was no time to charge up one for all. No time for a controlled, finger-flicking smash. No time for strategy or tactics. There was only time for instinct. The same desperate, sacrificial instinct that had awakened his power in the first place. He didn't make a bargain this time. He gave a command. The power coiled deep in his gut answered instantly, not with the familiar warmth of a controlled release, but with a violent, explosive surge. He didn't bother with a cut, didn't bother with a pinprick. He willed his blood to move, and it obeyed. The skin on his back, from his shoulder blades to the base of his spine, felt like it was being ripped apart from the inside. A fine, crimson mist erupted from his back, venting through the fabric of his hero costume. Before Shigaraki's hand could touch Tsuyu, the mist flash crystallized in the air. A spray of dozens of jagged, obsidian-red spikes, each a foot long and needle-sharp, erupted from Izuku's back. They didn't fly. They simply appeared, a grotesque, blooming flower of solidified blood. The world, which had been in slow motion, snapped back to real time. Shigaraki, his gamer's senses screaming at the sudden, immense threat that had materialized behind him, aborted his attack. He threw himself sideways with a yelp of surprise, a single, bloody line appearing on his cheek where the tip of a spike had grazed him. The entire plaza fell silent. The remaining fodder villains froze. Kurojire's misty form seemed to solidify. Even the mindless gnome ceased its brutalization of Aizawa, its head tilting slightly. Every eye was on Izuku Midoriya. He stood there, panting, his small frame made monstrous by the corona of glistening, crimson blades that jutted from his back. They dripped slightly, the excess blood that hadn't hardened running in rivulets down their sharp edges and spattering onto the concrete. His hero costume, the green jumpsuit his mother had so lovingly made, was shredded down the back, soaked in a dark, spreading stain. The coppery smell of blood was thick and overwhelming, a butcher's shop tang that cut through the sterile air of the USJ. His classmates, who had been scattered and were just beginning to regroup, saw the display. Ida, arriving with the pro-heroes in tow, stopped dead in his tracks. Uraraka let out a small, horrified gasp. Todoroki's mismatched eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his usually stoic features. Bakugo, who had just finished gleefully dominating the villains in the ruin zone, stared, his jaw slack. He knew that smell. He knew that color. But he had never imagined it on this scale. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't a subtle reinforcement. This was a monstrous, terrifying display of raw, visceral power. Izuku himself was reeling. The sudden, massive expenditure of blood had left him dizzy and nauseous. A wave of cold washed over him, the telltale sign of acute anemia. But he stood his ground, his eyes, wide and wild, locked on Shigaraki. He had saved Tsuyu. That was all that mattered. Shigaraki stared at the spikes, then at the gash on his cheek, and then at Izuku. A slow, deeply unsettling smile stretched across his chapped lips, visible beneath the hand on his face. "Whoa!" he breathed, his voice filled with a newfound, gleeful interest. "A health drain damage dealer. Now that's a rare character build. What a cool quirk. So villainous." The back doors of the USJ burst open with a force that shattered the glass. All Might stood there, and he was not smiling. His face was a mask of cold, righteous fury. The cavalry had arrived. The subsequent battle was a clash of titans. All Might versus the Noma. It was a fight that shook the very foundations of the facility, a brutal, desperate struggle that pushed the symbol of peace to his absolute limit. Izuku and his classmates could only watch, small and insignificant in the face of such overwhelming power. But even as he watched his idol fight for their lives, Izuku's mind was a maelstrom of fear. His secret was out. Not just to Aizawa, who suspected, but to everyone. His teachers, his friends, the villains, they had all seen it. They had all seen the monster hiding inside the hero in training. The crimson spikes, now that the immediate danger had passed, felt heavy and alien. With a thought, he let them dissolve, the solidified blood turning back into a liquid pool that soaked into his costume and ran down his back, leaving him feeling cold, empty, and horribly exposed. The aftermath of the USJ was a quiet, sterile affair. Police reports, witness statements, and medical checkups. Izuku sat on a cot in a temporary triage area, a thick blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He had been given a quick patch-up by a paramedic who had looked at his shredded, blood-soaked costume with a mixture of confusion and disgust. The questions he dreaded finally came. He was escorted to a small, private office. Aizawa was there, his arms in casts, his head wrapped in bandages, looking like a mummy. All Might, in his skeletal Tashinori form, sat beside him, his face a grim, unreadable mask. Principal Nizu, a small, white-furred creature whose cheerful demeanor did little to hide a terrifyingly sharp intellect, sat behind a desk, a cup of tea steaming between his paws. "Midoriya-kun," Nizu began, his voice polite and chipper. "First, let me commend you. Your quick thinking and decisive action saved Azuritsuya's life. You acted heroically. Of that, there is no doubt." Izuku mumbled a thank you, his eyes fixed on the floor. "However," Nizu continued, his tone losing none of its politeness but gaining a steely edge, "the nature of the ability you used is a significant cause for concern. It is not consistent with the quirk registered on your file, superpower." The silence in the room was suffocating. Izuku could feel the weight of their gazes. Aizawa's was analytical. Nizu's was curious. All Might's was filled with a deep, profound disappointment that twisted like a knife in Izuku's gut. He had to confess. The lie was too big now, the secret too monstrous to contain. "It's another quirk," Izuku mumbled, the words tasting like ash. He settled on the half-truth All Might had concocted for him, the story they had agreed upon in theory, but which now felt so flimsy and inadequate. "I call it hemokinesis," he explained, his voice trembling, the fabricated story of a latent, survival-type quirk. He told them how it had first manifested during the sludge villain incident, how it was powered by his own blood, how painful and draining it was. He left out the fact that he felt it wasn't a quirk at all, that it felt older, like a bargain he hadn't fully understood. He left out the 10 months of secret, bloody training in his bedroom. He presented it as a terrible, untamed power he was struggling to control. When he finished, the silence returned, heavier than before. Nizu steepled his paws. "A secondary quirk, and a corporeal manifestation type at that. Extremely rare. And one that uses the user's own body as fuel, a highly volatile and ethically complex ability. It explains the anomalies Recovery Girl noted in your entrance exam injuries." Aizawa spoke next, his voice raspy from his injuries. "It's a self-destructive power. Logically, it should be forbidden. The potential for misuse, or for the user to simply expire from its use in the field, is too high." He paused, his bandaged head turning to fix Izuku with a surprisingly intense gaze. "However, logic also dictates that a tool is a tool. It saved a life today when other options were unavailable. It was the correct tactical choice in an impossible situation. His words were a strange comfort, a cold, pragmatic validation. But then All Might spoke, and the comfort vanished. It is a villain's power, Toshinori said, his voice low and heavy with sorrow. He wasn't looking at Izuku, but at his own large, scarred hands. A power that feeds on pain and life. It is the antithesis of what a hero should be. A hero gives hope. A hero inspires with a smile. They do not terrify their allies and mutilate themselves for victory. One for all, it is a power of light. This is a power of darkness. They should not coexist in the same vessel. The rift that had been a hairline crack between mentor and student was now a yawning chasm. All Might's black and white view of heroism had no room for the bloody, terrifying gray that Izuku embodied. To All Might, Izuku's desperate act of salvation was a stain on the heroic ideal, a corruption of the legacy he was meant to inherit. I didn't know what else to do, Izuku whispered, tears finally welling in his eyes. He was going to kill her, and what would have happened if Shigaraki had called your bluff? Toshinori countered, his voice rising. If he had attacked you instead, how many more of those spikes could you have made before you collapsed from blood loss? You would have died, and Tsuyu would have died anyway. It was a reckless, emotional gamble, not a heroic act. Enough, Toshinori. Aizawa cut in, his voice sharp. The boy made a choice. It worked. We will deal with the consequences. He turned his gaze back to Izuku. Here is the decision. Yue will not expel you. Your power, while disturbing, was used to protect a classmate. It will be officially added to your file under strict monitoring. You will be required to attend mandatory counseling sessions with Hound Dog and undergo weekly medical evaluations with Recovery Girl to monitor the physical toll it is taking on your body. Any unauthorized use of this ability outside of a life-or-death situation will result in immediate expulsion. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Izuku choked out. He was allowed to stay, but he was now a known quantity, a monitored asset. He was no longer just a student, he was a potential liability, a weapon that was just as likely to break its wielder as it was to hit its target. The reactions of his classmates confirmed his deepest fears. When they were finally allowed to see each other, the mood was somber. But beneath the shared trauma of the attack, there was a new, unspoken tension. They had all seen what he could do. Uraraka and Ida were the first to approach him, their expressions a mixture of awe and deep, deep concern. Deku-kun, Uraraka said, her voice barely a whisper. Those spikes, that was incredible. You saved Tsuyu-chan. Indeed, Ida added, though his usual booming enthusiasm was absent. However, the manifestation of that power appeared to be incredibly taxing. Are you feeling all right? Your well-being is of the utmost importance. They were trying. They were trying to be good friends, to be supportive. But he could see the apprehension in their eyes. They had seen something monstrous emerge from their kind, timid friend. They were worried for him, but also, just a little, they were wary of him. Others were less subtle. Mineta actively avoided his gaze. Kaminari and Kirishima gave him a wide berth, whispering to each other. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling he hadn't truly experienced since middle school. He was once again the outsider, the weird one, the one with the dangerous, creepy power. He had sacrificed a piece of himself to save a friend, and in doing so, he had stained himself in the eyes of everyone around him. He doubled down on his internal conviction. This was a price he had to pay, his burden. If they feared him, so be it. As long as they were safe, it was a cost he was willing to bear. The Yue Sports Festival was announced shortly after they returned to school. It was a chance for them to show the world, and the villains who had attacked them, that Yue was unbowed. For Izuku, it was something more. It was a crucible. It was his chance to prove that his power, both powers, could be controlled. It was his chance to declare to the world, and to All Might. I am here. He trained with a frantic, desperate energy. He pushed his body to its limits with One for All, trying to increase his baseline control. He spent his nights in silent, bloody meditation, refining his hemokinesis. He learned new, subtle tricks. He could create a thin, almost invisible layer of hardened blood over his skin, a blood armor that was nearly undetectable but provided a surprising amount of resistance. He learned to create razor-thin, monomolecular wires of blood, tools for tripping or binding rather than overt attack. He was weaponizing his secret, turning his body into an arsenal. The festival began, a roaring spectacle of youthful power. In the first event, the obstacle race, he used a calculated, powerful smash to propel himself over the finish line, coming in first place. It was a declaration of power, but it was also a strategic move that made him the target in the next event, the cavalry battle. He was the 10 million point prize. No one wanted to team up with him, the marked man. Except for Uraraka, whose belief in him was a small, warm light in his growing isolation. With the addition of Mei Hatsum and Fumikage Tokoemi, they formed an unlikely, scrappy team. He was the rider, the target. He spent the entire match dodging, using his wits and his teammates' abilities to survive the onslaught. He used his blood magic in subtle ways, reinforcing his grip, creating small, hard shields on his arms to block incoming attacks, all hidden beneath his gym uniform. They managed to qualify, bruised but not broken. The final event was the one-on-one tournament. His first match was against Hitoshi Shinso from the general course, whose brainwashing quirk nearly ended his journey before it began. It was not his blood, but the ghostly vestiges of One for All, who snapped him out of the trance, a terrifying and inexplicable experience that left him shaken. Then came the match that would define him in the eyes of the world. Izuku Midoriya vs. Shoto Todoroki. Todoroki, the son of the number 2 hero, Endeavor, was a prodigy of immense power, but he was a prisoner of his own past, refusing to use the fire quirk he inherited from his hated father. The battle began with an overwhelming assault of ice. Izuku, knowing he couldn't match the scale of the attacks, responded with the only tool he had, controlled, self-destructive power. He flicked his finger. Smash! The shockwave shattered the first glacier. His finger broke. Todoroki sent another, larger wave of ice. Izuku switched hands, flicked his other finger. Smash! The second glacier exploded. Another finger shattered. The crowd watched in a mixture of awe and horror. He was systematically destroying his own body to stay in the fight. With each flick, he was pushing back against Todoroki's power, but also against the boy's icy resolve. He's not even flinching! Someone in the crowd whispered. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see what was happening under his skin. After the first finger broke, a searing pain shot up his arm, but instead of screaming, instead of succumbing to the agony, Izuku's other power kicked in. He was already bleeding internally from the shattered bone. He seized control of that blood. He forced it to clot around the fracture, to seep into the hairline cracks, and then he hardened it. He was performing a gruesome, real-time internal surgery, creating a makeshift cast of his own lifeblood around the broken bone. The finger was still useless, but the pain was muted, compartmentalized, locked away behind a wall of grim, bloody magic. He did it again with the second finger. And the third. And the fourth. He was a machine of sacrifice, breaking himself and then using his own essence to crudely piece himself back together, just enough to keep fighting. The crowd saw a boy with impossible endurance. He felt his own body becoming an alien landscape of broken, blood-forged bone. He was running out of fingers. His left hand was a mangled ruin. Todoroki was beginning to slow, his own eyes starting to coat his body in a layer of frost. Izuku saw his chance. This wasn't just about winning anymore. He saw a kindred spirit in Todoroki, someone trapped by their power, by their legacy. It's your power, not his! Izuku roared, his voice raw with pain and effort, channeling all his remaining strength into one last, desperate attack. He used a full fist smash, knowing his arm would be destroyed. Todoroki, his inner turmoil finally reaching a breaking point from Izuku's words, responded in kind. He unleashed his fire, a magnificent, liberating inferno that met Izuku's shockwave in the center of the arena. The explosion was immense, a clash of elemental forces that shook the stadium. Cementos and Midnight were forced to intervene, erecting walls to contain the blast. When the smoke cleared, Todoroki was still standing, albeit scorched and exhausted, while Izuku was blown back into the stadium wall, his left arm a mangled wreck, his body battered and broken. He had lost the match. But as he lay there, on the verge of unconsciousness, he looked up at the silent crowd. Their faces were not filled with pity for the loser. They were filled with a stunned, reverent silence. They had just witnessed a boy literally tear himself apart, piece himself back together with some unseen force, and then tear himself apart again, all to win a fight, all to save his opponent from his own demons. He was not a smiling symbol of peace. He was not a flashy, charismatic hero. He was something else. He was a boy who bled for his ideals, who paid for every victory with a piece of his own body. He was a hero whose every triumph was marked by a deep and terrible stain. And in the silence of that stadium, he knew that this was the hero he was destined to be.